I don't see how the Queen, who was described by Harry as vicious in his book, by Harry in the Apple interviews, can forgive him. I mean, he'd have to eat so much humble pie.
If Tom Bower just implied Archie isn't Prince Harry's biological son. For years, Bower has hinted at missing documents, strange timelines, and evidence he says could collapse the Sussex narrative. Meghan, who has sued everyone from tabloids to photographers, has never touched him legally. Not once. Why hasn't Meghan done anything to end the rumors? What does Tom Bower have against her? Join us as we find out all about Meghan and Tom Bower. The one lawsuit. Meghan Markle will never file. To people who follow celebrity lawsuits, Meghan Markle's legal strategy looks less like defense and more like offense. She and Prince Harry have treated the law as a tool to shape the public story around them. When the Mail on Sunday published a private letter she wrote to her father, her team didn't argue about tone or fairness. They went straight for privacy law and won. The court ruled the paper should never have printed it, even though the contents didn't flatter her. That case sent a message to editors everywhere about the cost of crossing her. The same pattern shows up again and again. Paparazzi were pursued for photos of Archie taken from outside a property fence. Harry has active lawsuits over newspaper articles about his UK security arrangements, claiming they crossed into defamation. Legal threats have been aimed at television hosts, online commentators, and even small social media accounts. Behind it all is Shillings, a London firm known for aggressive tactics that make publishers slow down, lawyer up, and sometimes kill stories before they run. The reputation alone does part of the work. That's why one detail keeps nagging people who pay attention. In 2022, journalist Tom Bower released a long, heavily sourced book that tore apart Meghan's carefully managed image. It ran hundreds of pages and laid out claims that would normally trigger an immediate legal response. Since then, Bower has gone on television and podcasts, escalating those claims, hinting at documents, and suggesting serious questions about Archie's paternity. These aren't vague jabs. In any ordinary case, they would be the kind of statements lawyers love to sue over. Yet there has been no public cease and desist, no filed defamation claim, no visible attempt to shut him down. The obvious legal move would be simple: sue, put the truth on the record, and end the speculation permanently. A single DNA test would settle the most explosive claim in days. Instead, there's silence. The reason matters. Defamation cases don't work like PR statements. Once a lawsuit is filed, control disappears. Discovery begins, and discovery is ruthless. Lawyers can subpoena medical records from a birth, not just certificates, but hospital logs, doctor notes, and prenatal files. They can depose medical staff and demand to know why certain names were never made public. They can pull travel records from the conception window and line them up against timelines. They can demand emails, texts, and internal PR discussions about how the pregnancy and birth were presented. Everything is sworn. Everything is tested. For someone who has shown zero hesitation in suing over articles and photographs, refusing that path here speaks louder than any press release. If a DNA test could shut this down in one shot and prove Bower is wrong, it raises an obvious question. Why has no one ever brought it up, offered it, or used it to put these rumors to rest, especially when they've been hanging over Archie since the day he was born? What Tom Bower actually found. Tom Bower didn't wander into the paternity issue randomly. In his telling, it came from following a long paper trail of behavior that looked the same no matter the setting. His book, Revenge, was built on interviews with more than 80 people, many of them speaking on the record, all describing patterns they said repeated across different stages of Meghan's life. The consistency of those accounts is what gave the story its weight. not one dramatic moment. People from the early Suits years described a clear progression over 7 seasons. At first, she was seen as appreciative and easy to work with. As the show succeeded and her profile rose, those same people said her attitude shifted. Requests turned into demands, and cooperation gave way to open impatience. Crew members who rarely complained about actors began sharing stories of being talked down to in ways they found shocking. When she entered royal life, similar complaints surfaced fast. Palace staff, who had worked for years with other senior royals without incident, reportedly raised concerns within months. Formal bullying complaints were filed, serious enough that Buckingham Palace acknowledged them and said an investigation would take place. Bower also documented how relationships outside work seemed to follow a predictable arc. Friends from before fame described being close until they stopped being useful, then suddenly cut off. Her first husband, Trevor Engelson, became a key source because his story lined up with others. According to him, the marriage changed once she secured Suits. Hollywood connections that once mattered no longer did, and the relationship collapsed soon after. Her father, Thomas Markle, paid for private schools and supported her acting ambitions for decades, then found himself excluded once the royal wedding turned him into a public risk. The pattern Bower emphasized was simple and repetitive. Strong charm at the start. Maximum benefit extracted. Expectations are rising quickly. Then separation, often followed by conflict or public criticism. He argued that when behavior repeats this cleanly across careers, friendships, and family, it stops looking accidental. The most controversial section of the book focused on her 2017 trip to Colombia with World Vision, months before her relationship with Harry became public. Bower cited multiple sources who said her conduct during that trip stood out. There were unexplained absences, private meetings that weren't on the humanitarian schedule, and long stretches where aides didn't know where she was. A photograph briefly circulated online, showing her in a luxury hotel hallway with a man who was clearly not Harry. Internet users noted his distinctive leather bracelet and matched it to a Colombian businessman seen elsewhere in trip footage before the image disappeared. Bower also included Engelson's account of a confrontation during their marriage involving a man leaving her hotel room on a work trip. In his version, the response wasn't denial, but reframing, presenting the encounter as strategic and career-minded rather than personal. That moment, as Bower presented it, crystallized how ambition was used to justify behavior others would question. By the time the book reached the paternity speculation, Bower framed it not as gossip, but as the logical endpoint of a long-documented pattern. Whether readers accept his conclusions or not, the reason the claims linger is that they're embedded in a broader narrative built from years of similar testimony. Once online sleuths lined up the dates from that Colombia trip with Archie's birth and looked closely at when the pregnancy was announced, the timeline started raising eyebrows. That's when the real question kicked in. What actual paperwork or proof does Bower claim to have? And why hasn't he put it all on the table yet? Timeline that doesn't add up. The internet runs on timelines and screenshots, and when it comes to Archie's birth, online researchers have spent years lining things up and asking why so many details felt off to them. None of this comes from official findings or court rulings. It comes from people comparing dates, photos, and public schedules and noticing gaps that they say were never clearly explained by the palace. The starting point is the calendar. Archie was born on May 6, 2019. Counting back, a typical pregnancy lands the likely conception period in late July or early August 2018. That's where amateur investigators focus their attention. During that stretch, Meghan and Harry were still managing long-distance schedules. Public records and photographs place her at events in the United States, while Harry was logged at royal engagements in the UK. To people scrutinizing the timeline, their movements didn't obviously overlap for long stretches, which raised questions online about when they were actually together. Attention then shifted to the pregnancy announcement. Meghan revealed she was expecting during the Australia tour in October 2018, a moment that guaranteed global headlines. Online commentators noted that most senior royals traditionally wait until the second trimester before announcing pregnancies, largely out of caution. Meghan stated she was around 12 weeks at the time, which isn't unheard of, but it stood out to observers already watching closely. The birth itself added fuel. Unlike previous royal births, details were slow to come out. There was confusion over which hospital was involved, and doctors' names weren't immediately released. The long-standing tradition of a post-birth hospital photo call didn't happen. When Meghan and Harry did present Archie publicly 2 days later, she appeared composed, styled, and walking in heels, which some viewers felt didn't match their expectations of someone who had just given birth, even though postpartum experiences vary widely. Then came the paperwork. Weeks after the initial filing, Archie's birth certificate was amended. Meghan's first names were removed, and her occupation was altered. Officials described it as a clerical correction, something that does happen, but the change became a focal point for online speculation because royal documents are usually meticulous. Photos and videos from the pregnancy were dissected, frame by frame. Some medical professionals commenting online said the appearance of Meghan's baby bump seemed inconsistent in size or position from one event to another. A clip from the Australia tour where her dress appeared to shift as she stood up became a viral moment. Mainstream outlets dismissed the theories that followed as baseless, but the images continued circulating because they were visual and easy to replay. None of this proves anything on its own. What it shows is how secrecy, even when justified, creates space for speculation. Once questions take hold online, every missing detail becomes magnified. For people already skeptical, the lack of straightforward answers didn't calm the conversation. It convinced them there was more to dig into, whether or not that belief was grounded in reality. If Archie's birth really followed the normal rules, it makes you wonder why every usual royal step was missing or hidden. No named doctors, no confirmed hospital, no official witnesses, and even the usual public announcements didn't happen on time or at all. Trevor Engelson's bombshell. For more than 4 years after Meghan and Harry tied the knot, Trevor Engelson stayed completely silent in public. Tabloids offered him six-figure sums for his side of the story about their marriage and divorce. But he refused. When Tom Bower finally spoke to him for revenge, Trevor's account wasn't angry or dramatic. It was calm, precise, the voice of someone who had been holding back, watching the world cheer a story he knew didn't match reality. He described their early years together in Hollywood as a partnership. Both were ambitious, navigating the tough entertainment industry while trying to boost each other's careers. But over time, Trevor said, Meghan grew frustrated when his producing work didn't advance fast enough to support her acting ambitions. Secrecy crept in. She started spending unexplained time in meetings or networking events that didn't line up with auditions or official schedules. A coldness appeared seemingly overnight once she booked Suits, the role that would eventually define her career. The moment that grabbed the most attention came when Trevor recounted a confrontation during a work trip. He discovered a man leaving the hotel room that Meghan had said she was alone in. The way she responded was what Trevor said. Explained her approach to situations. No denial, no guilt, no breakdown, just immediate calculation and reframing. She presented the encounter as networking, a career opportunity Trevor supposedly couldn't see because he didn't think ambitiously enough. She turned his reasonable concerns about fidelity into a critique of him. framing him as small-minded and unable to understand the sacrifices required for real success. Then there was the line that went viral online. She described the man as the type who changes lives. The emphasis wasn't romantic. It wasn't about an affair. It was about leverage, connections with influence, wealth, or industry access that could accelerate her climb. Trevor told Bower that after moments like this, her career began to shift dramatically. Better auditions, higher profile meetings, doors that had been closed suddenly opened. The implication, whether you believe it or not, is clear. Meghan used strategic personal relationships to boost her career. That doesn't mean she did anything illegal. Hollywood is built on networking, connections, and sometimes personal favors. But it clashes with the image she presented to the public. Her brand, carefully cultivated, had long emphasized empowerment, independence, and self-made success. Trevor's testimony painted a different picture, one where calculated moves behind the scenes, relationships leveraged for access, and careful timing were key tools in her rise. For people reading Bower's book, it wasn't a scandal for the sake of gossip. It was a pattern, one that fit the broader narrative of ambition and strategy he traced throughout her life. If she was already using personal relationships to get ahead in Hollywood before Harry, why wouldn't people think she might do the same later, especially when her marriage was under strain and she was traveling alone internationally? Harry starts asking questions. Once the paternity questions about Archie started gaining serious traction online, sources say Prince Harry began showing cracks that even his polished public image couldn't hide. Friends noticed changes in his voice on phone calls, sometimes shaking with frustration, sometimes sharp and short over things that normally wouldn't bother him. His temper reportedly flared unpredictably, and despite claiming he'd stopped following online commentary because it was toxic, he was checking comment sections and reaction videos obsessively, unable to let it go. It wasn't just Trevor Engelson's testimony or the leaked hotel photograph that unsettled him. What really got under Harry's skin was the timeline work done by amateur investigators online. People were lining up travel records, event appearances, photographs, and public statements with the pregnancy announcement and Archie's birth. Any single irregularity could be chalked up to privacy, tradition breaking, or control over the narrative. But when dozens of anomalies were stacked together, all pointing in the same direction and paired with reports of Meghan's strategic use of relationships for career gain, the pattern looked deliberate. Harry reportedly began asking questions he had never allowed himself to consider before. He wanted to know the exact dates, which doctors were present for Archie's birth, and why they were never named, and why the whole pregnancy and delivery had been so controlled compared to William and Kate's children. Friends say Meghan noticed the shift immediately. He stopped meeting her eyes during discussions about Archie. His questions became sharper, more direct, lingering over her silences in a way that made her visibly uncomfortable. The breaking point came when Harry finally voiced what had been building for weeks: why the DNA test had never been done. Sources described the room going ice cold. Meghan didn't cry. She didn't have a public-style, emotional moment. She froze, then turned the situation around with the same precision she had reportedly used in past confrontations. The question became less about honesty or clarity and more about accusation and control. She framed the situation as if Harry were siding with everyone against her: the palace, the media, online sleuths, and even Bower. She redirected the tension back at him, painting his concern as betrayal rather than legitimate inquiry. Observers say this was consistent with how Meghan reportedly handled challenges throughout her life: calm, controlled, and always ready to turn scrutiny into defense. To Harry, sources say it was exhausting and disorienting. He was confronting both the online speculation and private questions about trust and narrative, all while navigating a marriage already under strain and a public life that demanded perfection. The combination of secrecy, the meticulously assembled internet timeline, and Meghan's refusal to allow certain questions to be answered reportedly left him in a constant state of frustration, with no easy way to reconcile the stories circulating online with the reality he was living at home. By this point, according to sources, Harry was trapped between loyalty to his wife, accountability to the truth, and the relentless pressure of global attention. Every unanswered question added weight, and the DNA test, something simple and conclusive, had become the central point of tension that neither side wanted to address directly. Harry reportedly yelled in frustration, saying this wasn't about anyone else. It was about him not knowing if Archie was really his. So if Meghan had nothing to hide, why didn't she just agree to a DNA test that could settle it once and for all? Evidence. Tom Bower claims he's still holding back. The most unsettling part of Tom Bower's work on Meghan isn't what he's already published. It's the stuff he keeps hinting at, but hasn't shared. Since Revenge came out, Bower has given interviews where he carefully signals that the book contains only material he could safely print without risking lawsuits or exposing sources who demanded anonymity. He's talked about reviewing documents he hasn't published, interviewing people off the record, and knowing insiders in Hollywood, royal circles, and Meghan's personal life who could testify if a court-protected process allowed it. That combination alone makes anyone watching notice he's holding something significant. During one television appearance, Bower said something that made Sussex supporters uneasy. He explained that some stories don't vanish when deleted. They vanish only when the truth is proven, and he implied this story hasn't been proven yet. The subtext was clear. He has documentation substantial enough that making a false claim would be blatant defamation, but no lawsuits have come. He's referenced reviewing records from Hollywood to Colombia, and claimed to have interviewed hundreds of additional sources beyond the 80 named in Revenge. What's particularly striking is how specific Bower gets without crossing legal lines. In one interview, he mentioned flight manifests, hotel registries, and what he called contemporaneous communications from people present during key moments. He's talked about photographs beyond the hallway image that allegedly show Meghan with the same individual at multiple locations across several months. He's referenced medical professionals who expressed concerns privately about timeline inconsistencies, but feared career destruction if they spoke publicly. Bower has also hinted at financial records showing payments or arrangements that don't match the public story. None of this has been published in full, but the specificity suggests he's not bluffing. When someone talks about contemporaneous communications and flight manifests, they're describing documentary evidence, not hearsay. That level of detail doesn't come from speculation. When interviewers push for specifics about what he's holding back, Bower usually smiles and says that legal proceedings might create a space where it's safe to share more. He's not outright accusing anyone of anything new that could be sued over. Instead, he's sending a signal that he has information ready to release if the right conditions exist. That's psychological pressure at a very high level. He keeps people, including Meghan, guessing. For Meghan, this creates a nearly impossible dilemma. If she sues for defamation, the discovery process could force Bower to reveal the documents, emails, or testimonies he's holding privately. Those court records would make private claims public and permanent. On the other hand, if she doesn't sue, Bower's continued hints and implications slowly erode her reputation. Millions of people interpret her silence as tacit acknowledgement, even if there's nothing in public to prove the claims are true. Either path carries a serious cost. Bower's approach is strategically brilliant from a legal and psychological perspective. He doesn't have to prove anything immediately. He only has to maintain uncertainty. By signaling that he has materials ready but unavailable, he forces Meghan into a position with no easy answers. Any legal action could backfire by bringing sensitive evidence into public records, while inaction allows reputational damage to accumulate over time. In effect, he's controlling the narrative without making a single unprotected accusation. Every statement, every public interview is calibrated to make her choose between two losing outcomes: either risk exposure in court or live under indefinite suspicion. It's rare to see a strategy that combines legal leverage, media influence, and psychological pressure so effectively. And that's why the speculation surrounding Bower's withheld material continues to dominate discussions about Meghan and Archie. Bower keeps saying something that hits Ray harder than any direct claim. Innocent people don't fear verification. So why does Meghan seem so afraid? Hasn't she won before? Will Meghan win? Meghan Markle has scored another legal win in her long-running disputes with her half-sister, Samantha Markle. A Florida federal judge dismissed Samantha's defamation lawsuit with prejudice, meaning she can't bring the same claim again. The case centered on a 2021 CBS interview Meghan did with Oprah Winfrey, in which she described herself as an only child and said she didn't have a close relationship with Samantha, her half-sister, from their father Thomas Markle's first marriage. Samantha also claimed Meghan and Harry's 2022 Netflix series. Harry and Meghan contained multiple defamatory statements about her. In her lawsuit, Samantha argued that people around her turned against her after Meghan's statements, framing her as an opportunist trying to cash in on her sister's fame. She was seeking $75,000 in damages. However, the judge ruled that Samantha failed to provide evidence to back up her defamation claim. Judge Charlene Edwards Honeywell explained that the statements cited in the complaint were opinions, not verifiable facts. Allegations that Meghan painted Samantha as a stranger, a liar, or a deceptive fame-seeking imposter were considered subjective views, not legally actionable false statements. This wasn't Samantha's first attempt to take Meghan to court. She had filed defamation claims twice before, in 2022 and 2023, and both cases were dismissed for similar reasons. In those rulings, the court emphasized that Meghan's public comments about her childhood and her relationship with her half-siblings were opinions. They couldn't be empirically proven true or false, which is a key requirement in defamation law. The judge noted that, as a reasonable listener would understand it, Meghan was expressing her perspective rather than making verifiable statements about Samantha's character. Samantha had also taken issue with Finding Freedom, the 2021 book by Omid Scobie and Carolyn Durand, which included a chapter called A Problem Like Samantha. She argued the book implied negative things about her, but the judge pointed out that Meghan didn't write the book, so she couldn't be held liable for its contents. That claim was dismissed with prejudice as well. Other points in Samantha's lawsuit included Meghan saying she grew up as an only child, and references to Samantha changing her last name back to Markle, along with negative press coverage Samantha received after commenting on Meghan and Harry's 2018 royal wedding. The court determined none of these statements could be objectively verified as false and were therefore protected as opinion. Meghan's attorney, Michael Kump, expressed satisfaction with the ruling, noting that the court dismissed the case. Samantha's lawyer described the decision as upsetting and announced plans to appeal to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, hoping a 3-judge panel might see it differently. This dismissal adds to Meghan's legal record in family disputes, reinforcing that opinions, even when framed in a public forum like an interview or book, are protected from defamation claims unless clear, verifiable falsehoods can be proven. For Meghan, it's another confirmation that her public narrative and statements about her family, while controversial, remain legally defensible. Seeing her win before, the question isn't whether Meghan will eventually sue Tom Bower, The question is whether the truth he's implying will come out before or after their entire carefully constructed world collapses under the weight of speculation they refuse to definitively answer. Is Meghan avoiding the lawsuit because she's innocent, or because discovery would expose everything? If Archie isn't Harry's biological son, who do you think the real father is? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.